Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda.
Apakshakayana Sunanavasa Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda.
Mahaprabhu ki Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditramādyan Manasorasena.
Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditramādyan Manasorasena.
Romanchakampa Sutarangavadyo Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda.
Romanchakampa Sutarangavadyo Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda.
Shri Vigrahāradhana Nityanānam Shringarathan Mandiramarjanado. Yuktasya bhartam saniyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda. Chaturvida Shri Bhagavad Prasado Swadhana Triptan Harivaksha Sangram. Kritraiva Triptim Bhajata Sadaiva Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda. Shri Radhika Madhava Yurabhara Madhurya Leela Gunarupanamna. Pratikshanasvadanalolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda. Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda. Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda. Yuktirapekshaniya. Tatratidaksha Ativalabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charana-ravinda. Ritvina samasta shastre uktastatha bhayate vasadi. Prasada Nagati Topi Jayam Stuvam Stasaya Satri Sadyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam 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 Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastyatya Deshatharine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Chaitanya Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Chaitanya Nityananda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha, Nilamadva Radha, Nilamadva Radhe. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Shri Radhe. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshman Hanuman. Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha. Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Gurudeva, Jaya Gurudeva, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Jai Om Vishnupada Paramita Prabha Jatakshara Suttara Sarashimas Idvange Savachravina Bhakti Viranta Samarashira Prabhupada Ki Iskon Pratishta Bhakti Samstapakachar Vaishnava Sraman Padita Pavana Shila Prabhupada Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gurya Guru Varga Pati Udhari Ki Jai Shri Rup Sanatana Bhattara Gunath Shri Gopala Bhatta Dasa Gunasat Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai Ananta Puri Krishna Vendi Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Se Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vindi Ki Jai Param Dayas Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai Premanam Sankirtan Ki Janata Prema Purushottam Sachinanda Shriman Gauranga Se Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari Mavrana Avatar Ki Jai Guru Kera Pramadhan Hari Ram Sankirtan Jai Ki Jai Yuga Dharma Hare Krishna Mantra Ki Jai Pidama Translated Buddhist Christian Seva Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopukutna Radha Kansam Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrajam Vrindavan Mathuradam Ki Jai Hello Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai Shri Mayapurnavati Deka Chakradam Ki Jai Parama Karuna Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai Shri Purushottam Kitra Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Shri Shri Jagannath Swami Paradev Kusmas Paradev Sudarshan Chakra Bhagavan Ki Jai Bhakti Sarva Vigna Vinashna Kanishingare Bhagavan Ki Jai Ram Lakshman Hanuman Ji Ki Jai Ganga Mai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Devi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Srimati Radharani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vinde Ki Jai Nitai Gaurari Pramanande Hari Bo All glory to Sam Lord All glory to Sam Lord All glory to Sam Lord All glory to Shri Guru Shri Guru Namaste Narasingaya Namaste Narasingaya Pralada la da hoine Pralada la da hoine Hiranyakasipu Bhaksha Silatangkalaye Jaya Silatangkalaye Ito Nishingo Parato Nishingam Jato jato jami tato nishingam Bahirin nisingam Hrudaye nisingam Narasingamadim sharanam prapade Tava kara kamalavare nakam adabhuta singha Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanabringa Kesavadita Narari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Re Jai Jagadisha Re Jai Jagadisha Re Kesavadruta Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Re Jai Jagadisha Re Jai Jagadisha Re Jaya Nishingadev Jaya Nishingadev Jaya Nishingadev Jaya Nishingadev Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo जय श्री श्री भक्ति पथ सर्वविघ्नाशना करि सिंहरे भगवान की जय भक्त श्रेष्ठ प्रहलाद महाराज की जय निताय गौरारी प्रेमानंद हरि हरि बोल श्री वृंदाई तुलसी बाई प्रिय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रारे देवी शतवताय नमः नमः वृंदाई तुलसी बाई प्रिय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रारे देवी शतवताय नमः नमः वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रारे देवी सतवताय नमः नमः जय श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय to sing? You sing every day.
Okay. Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Priyasi Namo Namaha Radha Krishna Seva Pavo E Abhilasi Radha Krishna Seva Pavo E Abhilasi जे तुम्हारा शरण लोय तारा वंशा पूर्ण हो कृपा कोरि करो थारे वृंदावन भासी मोरा अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास नायने हेरी बोसारा युगल रूपरासी निवेदन धारो सखीरनुगत घोरो सेवारी करा दिए करो निज दासी दीन कृष्ण दासी खोय ये जना मोरा हो श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदायन भासी श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदायन भासी यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्ष्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणं परे परे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्ष्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणं परे परे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्ष्यन्ते प्रदक्षिणं परे परे Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Vrinda Devi 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 Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai.
Tulsi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to obtain the Radha. I will take shelter of his wishes fulfilled. Bestow your mercy upon him, you make him rise into Vrindavan. My desire is that he also give me a residence in pleasure groves, Vrindavan. Thus, within my vision, I will always Behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me effort, carry them so oblige. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me own maid servant. It's very fallen and lowly servant Krishna. May I always be love Shri Radha and Holy Shri Mati Tulasi Maharani Brinda Devi Ki. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikhastakam Ki Jai. Shri Akar Vichandrika Vitaranam Vidyavadhu Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Patipadam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatmasnam Parampara Vijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Baudha Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatrapita Niyamita Shmarane Nakala Etadrishi Tava Kripaya Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaivam Idrishamya Janina Nuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Saishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadhanam na janam na sundari Kavitam va jagadishakamaye Mama janmani janmanishwari Bhavatar bhakti raitukete Hainanda tanuja kinkaram Patitam mam visame bhavam buddho Kripaya tava pada pankaja Sitadule sadrisham vichintaya Nanam galorashudharaya Vadanam Gadagadharudaya Gira Pulakarinchitam Vapukada Tavanama Grahane Bhavisati Yoga itam Nimishena Chakrusha Prarusa itam Shunya itam Jagata Sarvam Govinda Virahiname Aslishva Pahadaratam Pinashtumam Adarshanan Marmahatam Karotuva Yatathava Vidadatulam Patta Marpranatastu Saivanapal Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Ki Jai Krishna Prema Padai Krishna Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life with repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the primary benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which all is anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govind. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are no hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by holy names, but I'm so unfortunate I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than straw in the street, one should be more tolerant than the tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your Yakasa devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yet some or other have fallen in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up? And will the hairs of my body stand on end of the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant and will in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he should remain so, even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Kam Ki Jai. So there are 10 offenses in the matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1, to blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2, to consider names of demigods and Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma to be equal to or independent of the name of Lord Vishnu. 3, to disobey the order of the spiritual master. 4, to blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures and pursuits of Vedic version. 5, to consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6, to give some interpretation on the holy name of the Lord. 7, to commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8, to consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in Vedas as fruitive activity karma kan. 9, to instruct the fatherless person about the glories of the holy name. And 10, to not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prem. Now let us offer most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnavas, devotees of the Lord. They are just like desired trees. They can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen, conditioned souls. Pancha kalpatarubhascha vipasindhubhya evata paritana bhagavato vaishnavibhyo namo. Jai Ananta Puja Vaishnavrind ki jai. Shri Guru Pranam ki jai. Om Jnana Granasya Gyananjana Salatam Chakshurumritam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manavishtam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kalamayam Chilati Swaparantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Jyotaparamam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamcha Shri Rupam Sahajatam Sahagana Raghunatha Vindam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padanam Sahagana Shantam Cha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shmate Bhakti Viranto Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shodhavani Asatya Deshatharini Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shmate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namine Srivashavani Devi Vaitala Kripakare Krishna Sambandha Vigyana Daine Prabhave Namaha Madhurya Madhya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Pragna Shakti Vigrahaya Namosute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Vinatarini Rupa Rupa Viruddha Sivanta Vandahane Namapura Vishwaraya Satchaditaya
Ambara Shambhave Prampujarate Maha Namo Vinodaya Saraswati Nandanaye Saraswati Swarupaya Rupam Gavrayate Guru Virbhava Pramestvam Yudhishta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Shri
Jagannatha Ete Namaha
Nachakalpatarubhyascha
Kripasindhubhya Eva Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahaprasthaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Vedam Suratumambo Ramamanda Tirtati Masarasa Panambojo Radha Vadanamo Divya Pindana Kapatumada Shmara Madara Shimasanastu Shmarana Shila Govinda Devo Prashtadi Shivamanu
Smarami Shiman Rasa Rasarambi Sivata Tatastita Karsan Venuswanir Gopir Gopina Kastriyeshvana Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai. Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Chentamani Prakara Satma Sakalpa Riksha Laksa Vritesha Surabir Abhipali Antam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambhrama Sevyamanam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Venam Kvanantam Aravinda Dalaya Taksham Parhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Vishesha Sobam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kala Sadvana Malya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shamam Tribanga Lalita Niyata Prakasam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vritti Manti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vedesa Durlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastakoti Satavatsara Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Munipungamanam Sobhyasti Yat Prapadasimya Vichintya Tatve Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sura Chayatum Jagadanda Kotim Yas Chakti Rasti Jagadanda Chayayadanta Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajasta Taiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusa Suktaryameva Nigama Pratitaistuvanti Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabis Tabirya Eva Nijarupa Tayakalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santaksa Deva Hidayesa Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Amenatistan Nana Avatara Makarod Bhuvane Sukintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pamam Yo Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadansh Koti Kotishvasesu Vasudadi Vibhuti Binam Tad Brahma Niskalam Anantam Ashesha Bhutam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Maya Yasya Jagadanda Satani Sute Trigun Yatad Vishaya Veda Vitayamanam Sattva Valambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasatmataya Manasu Ya Praninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya Lilayatena Bhuvanani Jaya Yajasram Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tale Chatasya Devi Mahesu Haridama Sute Sutesu Tete Prabhavani Jaya Vihitascha Yena Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shristi State Pralaya Sadhava Sakti Reka Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Icha Bandhanurupam api yasya chestatesa Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shiram Yata Dadi Vikara Visesa Yogat Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasthayetu Yasambhutam Apirtadat Samapaitikar Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Deeparchareva Hita Santaram Abhyapetya Deepayate Vivitahetu Samanu Dharma Yastadrik Eva Hicha Vishnu Taya Vibhati Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yakarna Narna Vajale Bhajati Sma Yoga Nidram Ananta Jagadanda Saroma Kupa Adhara Shaktim Avalamya Param Smamurtim Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Nisvasita Kalamatavalamya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagananda Nata Vishnur Mahansa Yasya Kalaviseso Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Basman Yatasma Sakalesu Nijesu Teja Sriyam Kiyat Prakatayat Apitad Vadatra Brahmaya Esa Jagadana Vidana Karta Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Pada Valava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha Dvande Pranama Samayesa Ganadi Raja Vignan Vihantam Alamasya Jagatrayasya Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Agnir Mahiga Ganamambu Marudisascha Kalas Tatatma Manasiti Jagatrayasni Tasmad Bhavanti Visanti Yamcha Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yaschaksuresa Savita Sakala Grahanam Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesa Teja Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakro Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Srutayastapamsi Brahmadi Kita Patagava Dayascha Jivaha Yadata Matra Vibhava Prakata Prabhava Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Sahusva Karma Bandhanu Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti Karmani Nirdahati Kintu Chabakti Bhajam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Krodha Kamas Praja Pranayadabiti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Sevya Bhavai Sanchitya Tasya Sadrisim Tanamapurete Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shiyakanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo Druma Bhumis Chintamani Kanamayi Toyam Amritam Kataganam Natyam Gamanam Apivam Sipriya Saki Chidanandam Jyoti Param Apita Daswadyam Apicha Sayata Shiradibhi Shravati Sirabi Vyascha Sumahan Nime Sardakyo Vavrajati Nahiyatrapi Samaya Bhajay Sveta Dvipam Tamaham Iha Kola Kamitiyam Vedantas Te Santakshiti Viralacharakati Paye Ishwara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Radhiradir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai Shri Guru Vastika Prayers Ki Jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy. Just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it, so the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. I offer my respectful obeisance to Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities, chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments. The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind. Sometimes his hair stands on end. He feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like waves. I offer my respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments and clean their temple and perform other similar worship of the Lord. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food, analyzed as that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet as such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava and their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet as such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavana. I offer my most humble humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is to be honored as much the Supreme Lord, because he's the most confidential servitor of the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master, who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master at least 3 times a day. I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master. Shri Guru Pranama prayers. Shrimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, verse number 26. Nirabidyata Shishno Vai Prajan Andam Ritartinam Upasta Asit Kamanam Priyamtad Ubayashrayam. Nirabidyata came out. Sisna, the genitals. Vai, certainly. Praja Ananda, sex pleasure. Amrita Artina, aspiring to taste the nectar. Upastaha, the male or female organ. Asit, came into existence. Kamanam, of the lustful. Priyam, very dear. Tat, that. Ubaya, ashrayam, shelter for both. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring, and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. The impersonalist must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals, on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material world is created to give the conditioned souls a chance for rejuvenation, for going back to home, back to Godhead. And therefore, generation of the living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such, one can even serve the Lord in the act of such sexual pleasure. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. In forms of life other than the human form, sexual pleasure is prominent without any motive of service for the mission of the Lord. But in the human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of the swine, meaning pig. Rather, the swine is more expert than the human being, because the swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth to only one at a time. So one should always remember that the genitals sexual pleasure, the woman, and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord, and one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of the dog, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring, and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So everything begins from Krishna and expands. And therefore, everything in the material world has a purpose. Even sex has a purpose. It is to engender good children who can be trained to become devotees so that they can go back to Godhead. And obviously the parents have to be more inclined to procreate for this particular reason. If it's any other reason, or if it's by accident, then what happens? One becomes entangled by the laws of material nature and is forced to unnecessarily suffer. So, therefore it says, the heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. Now that requires some explanation, because what is that taste? Usually you think of taste by the tongue, but actually the sexual pleasure is due to a coating of liquid on the genitals, and that liquid gives a so-called ecstatic feeling or sensation that is tasted not by the tongue but by the genital itself, by the genital organ. So these things are subtle and gross at the same time. And if we think about it, we see that the whole enterprise of sex is actually full of anxiety, because whatever pleasure that's felt is always accompanied by great responsibility, and that responsibility is long-lasting. So therefore, the continuity of the sexual act, let's say, is raising the children to be Krishna conscious. If one cannot make the children Krishna conscious, then one suffers because we have not acted according to the purpose of the material creation. And that suffering is very painful, and it lasts for a whole lifetime. So then it says, the woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. So we are forced to do all these things: eat, sleep, mate, and defend. We're not really independent. And we can't do it independent of the Lord. The Lord is involved in it, in all these things: the eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So therefore, when you think about it in depth, there's a right way and a wrong way for everything in this world. And if we act according to the right way, we avoid all the let's say, consequences, or all the nasty consequences. And if we do it the wrong way, we're just engulfed by nasty consequences all the time. It never ends. just like recently, one boy is only 15 years old. His parents gave him a gun for his birthday. So he got a hold of some ammunition because his father has a gun also. But it was laying around the house, so he took the ammunition. He went to school and he killed 5 kids. And so now the parents are also arrested and they're on trial also because they have new laws now. The parents can say, well, it's not me, I didn't do anything, it's my kid. No, they can't say that anymore. If the kid is a minor and he's under the protection of the parents, and and in this case, they gifted him the gun for his birthday, and they were going to teach him how to use it, and he went, I guess he's had some other training using a gun. So right away, the next day he gets the ammunition, goes to school, and kills 5 kids. So we see how this whole enterprise of having sex, procreating, and then having the responsibility of training the kids, there are many things that can go wrong. And when things go wrong, from the beginning, where if the sexual act is one of passion and not of duty, then it's a lifetime of suffering. And those parents are going to get convicted, and they probably have to go to jail, the husband and wife. And that's going on right now. I think it's in Colorado or one of those states. So, and then it says that the impersonalist must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals, on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. That's probably true. I mean, that is true. People, like you can see it in animals. Like, for example, we have our goats. So as soon as there's a male goat, he doesn't care about anything. It can be his mother, it can be his sister, it doesn't matter. He, right from, I would say, 4 months, they start trying to have sex, even though they can't have sex at that time. But they're jumping on the backs of their mother and all these other goats, even male goats on male goats, and they're practicing having intercourse. And you can see how powerful the sexual drive is in animals. And the same thing happens in a society like the one we have today, where there's so many images of people having sex in one way or another. In the movies, in the novels, in the newspaper. You have certain daily newspapers in London, in England. Every day there's some sexual thing in it. A woman almost naked, and stories about sexual things and so forth. Every day. People buy it because it's almost pornographic. It is pornographic, right? And it's a daily newspaper. And I think they print it several times a day. So you see how crazy culture has become today, where something like that would never be talked about, never be seen. Now it's every day. So the culture has deteriorated tremendously over time in the last 30 years, all over the world. Also, in Hindi movies, or in movies in India, Bollywood movies, they used to be really good themes. Nowadays it's the same thing as American movies. So it's become normal, these things. So no one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material world is created to give the conditioned souls a chance for rejuvenation, for going back home, back to Godhead. And therefore generation of the living being is necessary. for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Yeah, if you don't have any new children, then there won't be another next generation. Then the whole purpose of the material creation would be undermined, because the material creation is a chance for the living entities. Now, when we talk about living entities, we're talking about the 8,400,000 species, of which there's only 400,000 that are human, and out of the 400,000, there are very few humans that are actually civilized, that have a chance of going back to Godhead. So we see, it's not that, well, if you stop procreating, like, by using contraceptive methods, there are all kinds of contraceptive methods now, then there won't be any future generation. So what happens? It's a bottleneck. Bottleneck means there's a bund, there's a stoppage of what? Of the possibility for living entities to go back to Godhead. And that's not the purpose of the material world, to stop it. It's to give them a chance. So therefore, the incentive of experiencing this heavenly ecstasy, so-called, of the sexual act, and that's why, with all the contraceptives, with all the ways to stop birth, the population is still growing. It might be slowing down in certain places, but it's raging in other places. See? So these are things you cannot stop because there are laws of nature governing them. You can only artificially stop them for some time. So sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such, one can even serve the Lord in the act of such sexual pleasure. Even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, if I could have children and they become Krishna conscious, then I would consider having sex 100 times at least. Well, his father had, I think, 13 children, and most of them were Krishna conscious. I think all of them were Krishna conscious. Right? So if that purpose is accomplished, then one can have many children. But in general, Prabhupada did suggest, like 3 maximum, 3 or 4 maximum. But there's no limit if one can actually train the children to become Krishna conscious. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. So that one statement right there is the whole, let's say, gist of existence in the material world. And we can see how far away people are today from this point. Let's read that again. It says, the whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. So, if that's the whole purpose of the material creation, today they don't talk about anything like this. It's completely ignored, and they emphasize the opposite, that the purpose of life is sense gratification, make money, and then enjoy life, eat, sleep, mate, defend as much as you want. So, therefore, but in the human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. So there it is. That was just similar to the statement that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur made. Otherwise, if you don't train the children in God consciousness, otherwise begetting children is on the level of the pigs. Rather, the pig is more expert than a human being, because the pig can have a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth to only one at a time. So the animals who have a greater, let's say, potency, some of them do, than human beings, much greater potency for it, But they don't have the responsibility of training their offspring to become devotees of the Lord or go back to Godhead. But the human being does. So the human form of life has much more responsibility than any of the animal forms. So that's why some people don't want to be human beings. They don't mind taking birth as a dog or a pig or a gorilla or whatever, because they say, "Oh, what's wrong with that?" One time I organized this program for Prabhupada in France, and when he came, he was giving a lecture, and there was a room full of people. It must have been about 300-400 people, and he was saying, how you can take birth as a dog in your next life. So one idiot French guy raises his hand, and he said, "Oh, I don't see anything wrong with taking birth as a dog." He said it in French. Je vois pas un problème d'être un chien. So Prabhupada said, "Well, tatastu, so be it." Everyone gasped when he said that, I mean, all the devotees, because they understood that guy's going to have a horrible future. So there are people so crazy like that. They say these crazy things. They don't know what they're talking about when they say that. They don't understand. So therefore, so one should always remember that the genitals, sexual pleasure, the woman, and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. So both the mother and the father suffer. They both experience this so-called ecstatic pleasure of sex, this heavenly pleasure of sex, and that's due to the substances that are emitted during the sexual act, and the coatings of the genitals of the female and the male. But however, if they don't act according to the human responsibility of raising the children to become devotees, they suffer, and the suffering is intense. That one example of the boy who killed 5 kids, the parents are going to go to jail, probably for a long time. So the perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of the dog. But there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness. So the animals, they are forced to act and controlled completely by the supersoul. But the human being has free will, limited free will. So that means we got a lot more responsibility than the animals. This is further explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where it says, actually, I will go first to the dialectic spiritualism, where it's talking about Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was I think he was born in Denmark, and he was a so-called philosopher. He was born 1788 and he died 1860. Well, Schopenhauer was a person who opened the curtain of his window and looked at the universe and was horrified, because all he could see was misery. So he says in the book that he wrote called The World as Will, Schopenhauer writes, "My body is the objectivity of my will." Now, it doesn't mean he knows what he's talking about here, but he uses a lot of language. "Besides will and idea, nothing is known to us or thinkable. The genitals are properly the focus of the will, and consequently the opposite pole of the brain, the representative of knowledge. In this respect, they were worshipped by the Hindus. So he knew about Hinduism, right? They were in this respect. They were worshipped by the Hindus in the lingam. So he's talking about Shiva lingam. So it's a good day to discuss this because Shivaratri now, where we have the lingas right here. So he says, in this respect, they were worshipped by the Hindus in the lingam, which are thus the symbol of the assertion of the will. Knowledge, on the other hand, the will means what you will to do. You desire to do something. You're convinced you have to do it, and you're ready to do it. Right? On the other hand, knowledge, on the other hand, affords the possibility of the suppression of willing, of salvation through freedom, of conquest and annihilation of the world. So Schopenhauer was a negative Mayavadi. He wasn't even a positive Mayavadi. He was a negative Mayavadi. And that's why he says, knowledge, on the other hand, affords the possibility of the suppression of willing. Well, obviously, there's no such thing as suppression of willing. You can do it temporarily, but it's not going to be a permanent thing. And but that's only because of his negativity that he's coming up with a philosophy like this. And it's very negative. On the other hand, knowledge, on the other hand, affords the possibility of the suppression of willing, of salvation through freedom, of conquest and annihilation of the world. So Prabhupada says, as I said before, willing is done in accordance with the body. But we should understand that we have nothing to do with this material body, which is the production of the material will. We are spiritual, and when we will spiritually, we are Krishna conscious. When we will materially, we get different types of material bodies. So Schopenhauer wants to eliminate willing, right? That's what he says here. He says, on the other hand, knowledge, on the other hand, affords the possibility of the suppression of willing. Well, Prabhupada said, wait a minute, there's positive willing and there's negative willing. So Schopenhauer is only talking about negative willing. It's not the positive willing. But we should understand we have nothing to do with this material world, which is the production of the material will. We are spiritual. And when we will spiritually, we are Krishna conscious. When we will materially, we get different types of material bodies. It is true that the basis of material life is sex. We always say, Yan maitunadi grihamedi sukham hitucham, kandu yanena karayor eva dukkha dukkam, tripyanti neha kripana bahudukha bhaja, kandu divan manasijam vishaheta dira. Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th Canto, 9th chapter, 45th verse, and a discussion between Lord Nrsimhadev and Narada Muni, and Prahlad Maharaj. And it says, sex life is compared to this rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Grihamedis, so-called grihastas, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is the source of distress. The kripanas, the fools, who are just the opposite of brahmanas, are not satisfied by repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are dhira, very sober people, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. Well, tolerate this itching. By the way, it's true. Sometimes you have an itch. You don't know how it happened. So if you tolerate it, it goes away. If you scratch it, it doesn't go away. So we have to learn to tolerate itching. But if you scratch it, then it just gets worse and worse. So these are things that we learn through reading Srimad Bhagavatam, things that most people would say is impossible, right? But it's not impossible. One can tolerate itches. They're not all itches due to sex desire. There all kinds of itches come up for different reasons. One can be bitten by an insect. One can have toxins in the body. They're being released through the skin. There are many reasons that one can have rashes and so forth. There are many reasons why we have itches. But if you tolerate the itching, then eventually it subsides. If you scratch it, it doesn't get it doesn't get better, it gets worse, and the itching gets even more. So, therefore, the basic principle of those who are addicted to the material world is maituna, sexual intercourse. This strong desire for sex continues as long as we are in material existence, because that is the center of all pleasure. However, when we get a taste of Krishna's pleasure, we can give this up. So Schopenhauer doesn't talk about this. He's just on the negative side. But you see, there's, as I said, in every situation in life, there's the right way and the wrong way. So if we don't hear about the right way, then we just stay mired in the wrong way, and it's a life of suffering. So then, however, when we get a taste of Krishna's pleasure, we can give this up. Give up what? This maituna, this sexual intercourse. In other words, limit it just to having kids and training, but taking the responsibility from that point on to training them properly. Vishaya vinivartante nirahara siddhina rasavarjam rasapiyasya param drustva nivartate. This is Bhagavad Gita 259. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So unless we get this higher taste, we cannot give up the lower taste. It's just like if you have $1,000 and you lose $10. You lost $10, but it's not a big loss. But if you only have $11 and you lose $10, that's a big loss, right? So if we have no Krishna consciousness, then we are a big-time loser. We don't even realize we're a loser. That's the problem. But when you have a lot of Krishna consciousness, then it's nothing so difficult to tolerate an itch and not scratch it, and it'll go away over time. So that type of tolerance based on higher knowledge and a higher purpose of life is the potential of a Krishna conscious person. You can avoid a lot of problems in life by toleration. So certain things are inevitable, like itching, scratches, this thing, that thing, wounds. But if you have this great sense of toleration, then you can avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering. It's by itching that the suffering increases. And it's by becoming susceptible to engaging in illicit activities that suffering follows. So, therefore, we need to get this higher taste. If we have that higher taste, then we will not be subject to all these immediate sensations that derail us from following Krishna consciousness. So then the devotee says, Schopenhauer considers sex to be selfishness, whereas real love means sympathy. Okay, when it says sympathy, it means compassion for other people who are suffering. Prabhupada, sex is animalistic. It is not love, but lust. Sex means the mutual satisfaction of senses, and that is lust. All this lust is taking place under the name of love, and out of illusion, people mistake this lust for love. Real love says, people are suffering from a lack of Krishna consciousness. Let us do something for them so that they can understand the value of life. Okay, so that's sort of what Schopenhauer says when he says that sex is selfishness, whereas real love means sympathy. But sympathy, let's look up the word. It doesn't mean that you feel impelled to do something to help other people. Compassion does. Let's look up let's see if that's correct. Sympathy, sympathy. What's it say?
It's the feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune.
Okay, now look up. Yeah, go ahead.
And understanding between people, common feeling.
What? Understanding?
Understanding between people is also considered sympathy.
Okay, now look up compassion. What does that say? What's it say?
Yeah. Let's see. It says sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings and misfortunes of others. So, yeah, that's the only definition that is given. But it looks like the concern is...
It doesn't say one feels compelled to do something to help them. Look down further.
Compassion literally means to suffer together.
There is another definition here. In the compassion literally means to suffer together. Among emotion researchers, it is defined as the feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering.
There it goes. See, there's a difference between sympathy and compassion. I knew it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel compelled to do something. Just like now, there are actually several thousand devotees in Ukraine, and they're suffering right now, big time. So they're gonna. I think the GBC is going to try and do some kind of program to help them in some way or other. Send money or whatever. So we'll see. But see, when you have compassion, you feel compelled to do something to help people that are suffering. So that's what's being said here. Difference between lust and love. All this lust is taking place under the name of love, and out of illusion, people mistake this lust for love. Real love says, people are suffering from a lack of Krishna consciousness. Let us do something for them so that they can understand the value of life. Okay, so this is a very important point. And then in the Srimad Bhagavatam, now it explains something more profound, and that is it's talking about spiritual lust. As mentioned above, the Lord entered his home palaces occupied by 16,108 queens. This means that the Lord at once expanded himself in as many plenary expansions as there were queens and palaces, and entered in each and every one of them simultaneously and separately. Here is another manifestation of the feature of his internal potency. He can expand himself in as many forms of spiritual identity as he desires, even though he is one without a second. It is confirmed by the Shruti mantra that the Absolute is one alone, and yet he becomes many as soon as he so desires. These manifold expansions of the Supreme Lord are manifested as plenary and separated portions. The separated portions are representations of his energy, meaning living entities like you and me. And the plenary portions are manifestations of his personality. Thus, the personality of Godhead manifested himself in 16,108 plenary expansions, and simultaneously entered into each and every one of the palaces of the queens. This is called Vaibhava, or the transcendental potency of the Lord. And because he can do so, he is also known as Yogeshwara. Ordinarily, a yogi or mystic living being is able to expand himself at utmost to tenfold expansions of his body. In other words, yogis, mystic yogis, can expand themselves 10 times, but each one is doing the same thing simultaneously. Krishna can expand himself infinitely, and each one of his expansions can be doing different things. So there's a major difference between a mystic yogi and Krishna, who is Yogeshwara, the master of all mysticism. But the Lord can do so to the extent of as many thousands or infinitely as he likes, expansions of himself. Unbelievers become astonished to learn that Lord Krishna married more than 16,000 queens, because they think of Lord Krishna as one of them and measure the potency of the Lord by their own limited potency. One should know, therefore. In other words, they think, that's got to be mythology, that's got to be a story, it can't be true, I can only mate with just so many women, but 16,100? No, I can't believe that. One should know, therefore, that the Lord is never on the level of the living beings, who are but expansions of his marginal potency, and one should never equalize the potent and the potency, although there is very little difference of quality between the potent and the potency. So the potent is Krishna, the potency are all living entities and everything else coming from Krishna. The queens were also expansions of his internal potency, and thus the potent and the potencies are perpetually exchanging transcendental pleasures known as pastimes of the Lord. One should not, therefore, become astonished to learn that the Lord married so many wives. On the contrary, one should affirm that even if the Lord marries 16,000 million wives, he is not completely manifesting his unlimited and inexhaustible potency. He married only 16,000 wives and entered in each and every one of the different palaces just to impress in the history of the human beings on the surface of the earth that the Lord is never equal to or less than any human being, however powerful the human being may be. No one, therefore, is either equal to or greater than the Lord. The Lord is always great in all respects. God is great, is eternal truth. Therefore, as soon as the queens saw from a distance their husband, who was away from home for long periods, due to the battle of Kurukshetra, they all arose from the slumber of meditation and prepared to receive their most beloved. According to Yajnavalkya, religious injunctions, a woman whose husband is away from home should not take part in any social functions, should not decorate her body, should not laugh, and should not go to any relative's house in any circumstance. This is the vow of the ladies whose husbands are away from home. At the same time, it is also enjoined that a woman should never present herself before her husband in an unclean state. She must decorate herself with ornaments and good dress, and should always be present before the husband in a happy and joyous mood. Wow. The queens of Lord Krishna were all in meditation, thinking of the Lord's absence, and were always meditating upon him. The Lord's devotees cannot live for a moment without meditating on the Lord. And what to speak of the queens, who were all goddesses of fortune, incarnated as queens in the pastimes of the Lord at Dwarka. So, you see, this always thinking of the Lord, that is a symptom of a devotee. Not always thinking of making money or always thinking of having sex, but always thinking of the Lord. That's why we have the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And if you say it out loud, your mind will follow it. Right? Or we also have Krishna, 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 Hare. Krishna, 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 Hare. Krishna, 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 Rakshamam. Krishna, 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 Pahimam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava, Pahimam. So this Lord Chaitanya was chanting this along with the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. In other words, he would chant Hare Krishna, and then sometimes he would chant this, which is very nice. You can do it. Try it during the day. Whenever you feel yourself, wandering, your mind wandering, just go Krishna, 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 Hey. Krishna, 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 Hey. Krishna, 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 Rakshamam. Krishna, 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 Pahimam. Krishna, 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 Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam. It's very nice. And you keep your mind focused on who? Krishna. So, it says, the Lord's devotees cannot live for a moment without meditating on the Lord. And what to speak of the queens, who were all goddesses of fortune, incarnated as queens in the pastimes of the Lord at Dwarka. They can never be separated from the Lord, either by presence or by trance. The gopis in Vrindavana could not forget the Lord when the Lord was away in the forest cowherding. When the Lord boy, Krishna, was absent from the village, the gopis at home used to worry about him traversing the rough ground with his soft lotus feet. By thinking thus, they were sometimes overwhelmed in trance and mortified in heart. Such is the condition of the pure associates of the Lord. They are always in trance, and so the queens also were in trance during the absence of the Lord. Presently, having seen the Lord from a distance, they at once gave up all their engagements, including the vows of women, as described above. According to Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there was a regular psychological reaction on the occasion. First of all, rising from their seats, although they wanted to see their husband, they were deterred because of feminine shyness. But due to strong ecstasy, they overcame this stage of weakness and became caught up with the idea of embracing the Lord. And this thought factually made them unconscious of their surrounding environment. This prime state of ecstasy annihilated all other formalities and social conventions, and thus they escaped all stumbling blocks on the path of meeting the Lord, and that is the perfect stage of meeting the Lord of the soul, Sri Krishna. And the next verse is very important. It says, the insuperable ecstasy was so strong that the queens, who were shy, first embraced the Lord in the innermost recesses of their hearts. Then they embraced him visually, and then they sent their sons to embrace him, which is equal to personal embracing. But, O chief amongst the Brigus, though they tried to restrain their feelings, they inadvertently shed tears. So, the purport to this verse is very important. It said, although due to feminine shyness, there were many hindrances to embracing the dear husband, Lord Sri Krishna. The queens performed that act by seeing him, by putting him in the cores of their hearts, and by sending their sons to embrace him. Still, the act remained unfinished, and tears rolled down their cheeks despite all endeavors to check them. One indirectly embraces the husband by sending the son to embrace him, because the son is developed as part of the mother's body. The embrace of the son is not exactly the embrace of the husband and wife from the sexual point of view, but the embrace is satisfaction from the affectionate point of view. The embrace of the eyes is more effective in the conjugal relation, and thus, according to Srila Jiva Goswami, there is nothing wrong in such an exchange of feeling between husband and wife. This is the nature of spiritual sexual relationships in the spiritual world. And it's a big subject, and there's more to talk about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Are there any questions? No questions? Then we will have Guru Puja. Hari Bol. Yes, that's why I wanted you to hear it. We can chant it any time in the day, along with Hare Krishna. But whenever you feel your mind wandering a little bit, just go Krishna, 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 hey. Krishna, 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 hey. Krishna, 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 Rakshamam. Krishna, 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 Pahimam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava, Pahimam. That'll bring your mind back. And that's why Lord Chaitanya was chanting this mantra also in Sankirtan. Okay, so who's going to chant? Shri Guru Charana Padma. Go ahead.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhagati Sadma.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhagati Sadma.
Bandha muhi savadhana mate.
Bandha muhi savadhana mate.
Jahara prasade bhai e bhavatoriya jai.
Janara prasade bhai e bhavatoriya jai.
Krishna prapti ho jaha hoite.
Krishna prapti ho ya hoite.
Guru mukha padma vakya chitete koriya kya. Guru mukha padma
vakya chitete koriya kya.
Arna kori ho mane asha.
Arna koriya mane asa.
Shri Guru charane rati aise utama gati.
Shri Guru charane rati aise utama gati.
Jai prasade pure sarva asha.
Ye prasade pure sarva
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से.
चक्षुदान दिल जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से.
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो.
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो.
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाशा जयते.
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाशा जयते.
वेदे गाए जहाँ रचरितो. श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु.
गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु.
लोके नाथ लोके राजीवाना.
लोके नाथ लोके राजीवाना.
हा हा प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया.
प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पद छाया.
Ebejas gushuk tribhuana Prabhupada patita pavana Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada.
Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada.
Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashata Deshatarine Jayo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jayo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Krishna Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol,
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Ayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Statara Statara Shri Shimali's Divine Grace Shri Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai Anant Koti Vaishnava ki jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai Prem Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhakta Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Mayapura Dham ki jai, Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai, Tulasi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ganga Maya ki jai, Jamuna Maya ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu. The lotus feet of our spiritual master is the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow down to this lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lips. Attachment to his lotus feet is perfection and fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him, ecstatic prema emanates. By him, ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada